Good morning, children. Let us start with part 6 of lesson 9, Kings and Chronicles. The imperial household. The term harem is frequently used to refer to the domestic world of the Mughals. It originates in the Persian word harem, meaning a sacred place. Children, a number of women living with one man, especially in Muslim societies, was called as harem. It can also be called as the part of the building the women live. That was also called as a harem. The Mughal household consisted of the emperor's wives and concubines. Now, who were the concubines? Concubines were those people, that is, those women who cohabits with a man to whom she is not legally married, especially one regarded as socially or sexually subservient, that is, mistress. It happened among polygamous people. A secondary wife can also be called as concubine. She is usually of inferior rank. That is the exact meaning of concubine. So the Mughal household consisted of the emperor's wives, and concubines were also there. His near and distant relatives were there, in which mother, stepmother, foster mother. Now, who is foster mother? Foster mother is a woman who takes the place of a mother in raising a child. That is foster mother. So foster mothers, stepmother, sisters, daughters, daughter-in-laws, aunts, children, etc. And female servants and slaves were living where in the Mughal household. It consisted of these people. Polygamy was practiced widely in the Indian subcontinent. What is polygamy? Custom of having more than one wife at the same time. That is polygamy. It was practiced widely in the Indian subcontinent, especially among the ruling groups. Both for the Rajput clans as well as for the Mughals, marriage was a way of cementing or making or framing political relationships and forging alliances. What is forging alliances? It is making successful relationship with another one. In politics, that is forging alliances, making friends with the other one in order to raise the business of politics, right? That is forging alliances here. Then, the gift of territory was often accompanied by the gift of a daughter in marriage. This ensured a continuing hierarchical relationship between ruling groups. It was through the link of marriage and the relationships that developed as a result that the Mughals were able to form a vast kinship network. Vast kinship network, that is the fact of being related in a family, that is kinship. They were able to form a vast kinship network that linked them to important groups and helped them to hold a vast empire together. In the Mughal household, a distinction was maintained between wives who came from royal families. They were called as begums. Why? Because they came from royal families. And other wives were also there. They were called as agas. They were not of noble birth, but still they were wives, right? The begums married after receiving huge amounts of cash and valuables as dower or meher. They naturally received a higher status and greater attention from the husbands than did agas. Why? Because they brought huge amounts of cash and valuables as dower with them or as meher with them. That is why they secured more status and greater attention was given to them. The concubines, the aga or sorry, not aga, the agacha or the lesser aga. They occupied the lowest position in the hierarchy of females intimately related to the royal class or related to the royalty. Lowest position was theirs. They all received monthly allowances in cash, supplemented with gifts according to their status. The lineage-based family structure was not entirely static. That is, it was not that way, that is, it was immobile. Or it was not that way, that is, it had no motion. No, not that way. What used to happen was That is, it was not entirely static. The Agha and the Agacha could rise to the position of a Begum depending on the husband's will, and provided that he did not already have four wives. If he had four wives, then nobody could become Agha, or Agacha could not become Begum, right? But if he was not having four wives, then an Agha or Agacha could rise to the position of a Begum also. If it was said yes by the husband, that is, if it was according to the husband's will, then love and motherhood played important roles in elevating such women, which women, Agha and the Agacha, to the status of legally wedded wives, or to the status of Begum, which were the two factors that were important: love and motherhood. Love towards whom? Towards the husband. If the husband loved the wife, that is, if she was dear to her husband, then, and second thing was motherhood. If she became mother of a child, or she produced babies for whom? For the king. Then, of course, she became important for the king, and then she rose to the position of a Begum. So this was the way how Agha and Agacha could rise to the position of a Begum. Two factors, love and motherhood. Next, apart from wives, numerous male and female slaves populated the Mughal household. The tasks they performed varied from the most mundane to those requiring skill, tact, and intelligence. That is, mundane is what here? Mundane is dull work, not interesting work, ordinary work. That is, they performed works ranging from ordinary to those requiring skill, tact, and intelligence. Who did this? That is, many males and female slaves were there. Many male and female slaves were there. Where? In the Mughal household. Slave eunuchs, they were called as the Khwaja Sara. Who were they now? Children, eunuch is a man whose testicles have been removed, especially one who guarded women in some countries. That is, particularly, we are talking about Asian countries in the past. We can also call that as a person without power or influence. That one was called as Khwaja Sara. They were the only ones who were allowed to move between the external and the internal life of the household. They were kept as guards, servants, and also as agents for women dabbling in commerce. Why? Because they were safe for their ladies. Whose ladies? The king's ladies. The Mughal household ladies, they were safe for them. Who were safe for them? The Khwaja Sara, or the eunuchs were safe for them. That is why they were kept as guards, servants, and also as agents for women dabbling in commerce. What is the meaning of dabbling? Dabbling is becoming involved in something. That is dabbling. And dabbling here is, that is in a way that is not so serious. They're interested in commerce. That is why they do so. Right? That is dabbling here. After Noor Jahan, Mughal queens and princesses began to control significant financial resources. Shah Jahan's daughters, too, Jahan Ara and Roshan Ara, they enjoyed an annual income often equal to that of high imperial mansabdars. Jahan Ara, in addition, received revenues from the port city of Surat, which was a lucrative, that is profitable, center of overseas trade. Control over the resources enabled important women of the Mughal household to commission buildings and gardens. Jahan Ara participated in many architectural projects of Shah Jahan's new capital, that was called as Shah Jahanabad in Delhi. Among these was an imposing double-storied caravanserai with a courtyard and garden. Imposing here is big and important. It can also be called as impressive. It was a double-storied caravanserai, and it had what in it? Courtyard was there in it, and a garden was also there. The bazaar of Chandni Chowk, the throbbing center of Shah Jahanabad, was designed by Jahan Ara. An interesting book giving us a glimpse into the domestic world of the Mughals is the Humayun Nama that was written by or which was written by Gulbadan Begum. Gulbadan Begum was the daughter of Babur. Humayun's sister she was, and Akbar's aunt was Gulbadan. Gulbadan could write fluently in two languages, that is both Turkish and Persian. When Akbar commissioned Abul Fazl to write history of his reign, he requested his aunt Gulbadan to record her memoirs of earlier times under Babur and Humayun for Abul Fazl to draw upon. What Gulbadan wrote was no eulogy of the Mughal emperors. Eulogy is not something that is a speech or piece of writing that says good things about somebody or something. It was not that of the Mughal emperors. Rather, she described in great detail the conflicts and the tensions among the princes and kings, and the important mediating role that elderly women of the family played in resolving some of these conflicts. The imperial officials, recruitment and rank, information and empire, beyond the center that is provincial administration. We'll be talking about this now. Recruitment and rank. One important pillar of the Mughal state was its corps. Was its corps of officers, also referred to by historians collectively as the nobility. Children, what are corps or who are the corps? Corps are in part of an army with special duties. They can also be called as nobility here. The nobility was recruited from diverse ethnic groups and religious groups. This ensured that no faction was created, or this ensured that no faction was large enough to challenge the authority of the state. What is a faction, children? It is a small group of people within a larger one whose members have some different aims and beliefs than their larger group. That is faction. The officer corps of the Mughals was described as a bouquet of flowers that was called as guldasta, held together by loyalty to the emperor. Loyalty was important to the emperor. In Akbar's imperial service, Turani and Iranian, these nobles were present from the earliest phase of carving out a political dominion. Two ruling groups of Indian origin entered the imperial service from 1560 onwards. They were of the Indian origin. Who were they? They were the Rajputs and the Indian Muslims. Indian Muslims were called as the Sheikh Zadas. The first to join was the Rajput chief, Raja Bhar Mal Kachwaha of Amer, to whose daughter Akbar got married. Members of Hindu caste inclined towards education and accountancy were also promoted. A famous example being Akbar's finance minister Raja Todarmal, who belonged to the Khatri caste. All holders of government offices held ranks that were called as mansabs, comprising two numerical designations, Jat and Savar. Jat, which was an indicator of position in the imperial hierarchy, and the salary of the official, that is Mansabdar, and Savar, which indicated the number of horsemen he was required to maintain in service. That was Jat and Savar. I can also say that Jat indicated the number of the troops which a Mansabdar was expected to maintain, while Savar indicated the actual number of horses under the command of a Mansabdar. Student, Mansabdar is a term or was a term which meant rank holder. Next is Jat we discussed, Savar we discussed in the 17th century. Mansabdars of 1000 Jat or above were ranked as nobles. They were also called as Umara, which is the plural of Amir. The troopers maintained superior horses, branded on the flank by the imperial mark that was called as Dag. Now, what was this? That is flank. Flank was the side of horse's body, that is on the side. One imperial mark was laid, and that was called as dag. The emperor personally reviewed changes in rank, titles, and official postings for all except the lowest ranked officers. That is, he did not go through the lowest ranked officers, otherwise, the changes in rank, the titles, and official postings, everything he saw. A person wishing to join the service petitioned through a noble, presented a tajweez to the emperor. If the applicant was found suitable, a mansab was granted to him. The Mir Bakshi, or the paymaster general, stood in open court on the right of the emperor and presented all the candidates for appointment or promotion, while his office prepared orders bearing his seal and signature, as well as those of the emperor. There were two other important ministers at the center. One was the Diwane-Ala, and the second one was Sadr-us-Sudur. Diwane-Ala was responsible for finance. That is why he was called as Diwane-Ala, as he was the finance minister. And Sadr-us-Sudur, he was the minister of grants, or Madad-e-Maash. He was also in charge of appointing the local judges, or the Qazis. Nobles stationed at the court, Tenat-e-Rakab, were a reserve force to be deputed to a province or military campaign. That's all, children, for this part. Meet you again with the next part. Thank you.